Good evening. I hope whoever shows up first can let me know if anybody can hear me. All right. I believe we are live and in action. All right. As you know, my name is Connie Stapleton, and I would like to welcome you this evening. It is Wednesday. We meet every Wednesday here on Facebook Live at 9 p.m. for Food Addiction, Fair and Firm. I'd like to remind you that all of the videos for Food Addiction, Fair and Firm are housed on my website, www.conniestapletonphd.com. They are also on my YouTube channel, which is also just my name, Connie Stapleton. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel and share this information with anybody you know who you believe might have a food addiction. Even if they're not sure or you're not sure, but they're struggling to keep weight off once they lose it, they could probably benefit from some of the information on this discussion. So I would like to again thank you for sharing your time with me this evening. And we are going to go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder for what Fair and Firm stand for in our discussion related to food addiction, I will remind you that FAIR means food addiction is real. You know that food addiction is real if you suffer from it. If you don't suffer from food addiction, it's pretty hard for you to understand why somebody can't just leave something alone. If you suffer from alcoholism, you understand why it's not just as easy as pushing away from the bar. If you suffer from pain medication addiction, you understand why you can't just take Motrin and get what you're looking for. People who have never been addicted to anything really struggle to understand it because it's very difficult to understand. It doesn't make sense. Why would somebody keep doing the things that they do when they know it's causing harm to themselves and to other people? It's kind of the nature of addiction, because addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And until we learn some really strong coping skills to fight against it, and we have a solid system of support, it's pretty difficult to get away from addiction all by yourself. So again, welcome everybody. And tonight we are going to be talking about why me. You've probably asked yourself this question if you're an addict of any sort. Why me? Why do I have the distinct honor and privilege of suffering from an addiction? Well, we're going to talk about some of the whys. And as you know, or you've probably guessed, it's not a question that is easily answered, because there is not simply one answer for why am I an addict, all right? If you find yourself asking why me, you're pretty normal, all right? You can't stay in that place. You can't live in that place forever, because if a person stays in the why me mentality for a very long time, they're just going to be a victim. And victims don't do very well. And after a while, people get tired of hearing your poor, pathetic story, right? So the solution is you've got to figure out how to live with addiction and find healing from addiction. It's not that different from any other disease. You know, you have to accept it. You have to become aware of what you can do about it. And then you have to put forth the effort and have the right attitude to deal with it. So why me? Why are you the fortunate one to get stuck with being an addict? And I kind of joke about that, but honestly, you'll hear me very often saying I'm a grateful recovering addict. And the reason that I'm grateful is because I truly, truly believe with every fiber of my being that people who struggle with, maybe it's not just being an addict of whatever sort, but any kind of difficulty in life that they dig into, work through, and overcome, find healing from, the people who do that, to me, are people who develop character, who develop a sense of I don't want to say necessarily triumph, because it's never over and done, but a sense of self-efficacy, meaning I can do this. I can work toward improving myself. I can realize that no matter what problems facing me in life, I can find support to deal with them. I can dig deep within myself, look for answers within myself, and I can develop coping skills and help from other people to work through whatever problems are bothering me. But let's talk about who becomes an addict and why a person becomes an addict. As you know, if you've struggled with the disease of obesity, and let me remind you as I get into this, that the diseases of obesity and the disease of addiction are very different diseases, and they need separate treatment. If you've had weight loss surgery, if you're having weight loss surgery, you have to understand that the surgery is designed to treat the physiological symptoms related to the disease of obesity. Bariatric surgery does not do anything to deal with addiction. So if you have food addiction, or if you have food addiction and you have surgery and then you turn to another addiction, if you switch addictions, if you were already engaging in other addictions and they become pronounced after weight loss surgery because food is not initially an option for you in the way it was to deal with your emotions, then you need some help. You need to treat the addiction separately from the obesity. If you've struggled with the disease of obesity, you understand that the causes of obesity are multifaceted. The same is true for the disease of addiction, but let's take obesity just for 1 minute, the disease of obesity. It's caused by, there are many, many influences that culminate to a person struggling from the disease of obesity and the obesity showing on their body. One of those factors is, of course, genetics. There are many genes involved in whether or not a person is susceptible or more likely or predisposed to being obese than if you don't have those genes, all right? It's not that if you don't have all of those genes, you can't still be obese, because you can. And that's because there are a lot of influences. So in addition to genetics, there are medical issues that influence obesity, some of them being, polycystic ovarian syndrome, certain thyroid conditions, medications for other diseases often result in weight gain. The use of chronic steroids to treat other diseases increases weight. Some birth control measures, medications add easily to a person's gaining weight. Other influences to obesity are culture. In some cultures, it's more readily acceptable to carry extra weight. It's when health is impacted in negative ways that, it's kind of something that needs to be looked at. Cultural foods. A lot of cultures eat certain ethnic foods that are more likely to put on pounds than others. Just your family's eating habits, your family culture can influence your weight. So there are a lot of factors, and the same is true with addiction. So let's talk about some of the factors that increase your odds of an addiction showing up in your life. Genetics are involved. There's ongoing research, just like there is in the disease of obesity and all the other diseases. And the research consistently shows that there are genetics that make you more susceptible to addictions being active in your life, showing up in your life. Also, the environment in which you were raised, just like the disease of obesity. If you're raised in an environment where drinking is commonplace, where, You're introduced to alcohol, and a lot of it, there are certain cultures where alcohol is introduced at an early age and it doesn't become a problem for a lot of people. There are other cultures where it's introduced at earlier ages, whether that's the family culture or maybe an Irish culture, for example. I use that one because that's where I came from. And a lot of the people drank early, they drank often, and we grew up thinking you smoke and drank when you grew up. And so most of us did. And depending on other factors, maybe we became alcoholic, maybe we didn't. Some of those other factors are level of stress in your home, what kind of environment you grew up in, and those are the things we're going to talk about tonight. So I want you to be open-minded about this, because sometimes people are very resistant. We don't want to hear it because we don't want to say, oh my gosh, could that really have happened in my family? That's one of the things that kept me from getting treatment earlier than I did, because every time I went to therapy to deal with whatever addiction I was kind of, on the border of at that moment or over the border of, they wanted to talk about my childhood, and I did not want to go there. I wanted to believe that nothing from my past or no one from my past had anything to do with the ways I was acting out. Well, it turns out I was wrong, and when I became willing to look at those things, I was more willing to do the work that was required to find healing from my addictions, to find abstinence. It was difficult to be abstinent from my addictive behaviors, my addictive substances, when I was too afraid to look at the issues that I didn't want to. And earlier on, weeks ago, we talked about what keeps you resisting being abstinent from your addictive substances. And a lot of people put fear and fear of feelings and emotions and dealing with issues I don't want to look at. And that's very, very true. Now, just because a person may be born with the genetics that makes them susceptible or predisposed to addiction, it doesn't mean that a person is necessarily going to act that out. The same is true with diseases like obsessive compulsive disorder or anxiety or depression. The environment in which one is raised can have a huge impact on whether or not those genes flourish or kind of are opened up or never need to be opened up. That's very complicated. You can read about the food addiction genetics and biology in Vera Tarman's book, Food Junkies. Amazing book, which a lot of you have read and a lot of you understand that it can explain the physiology. I'm going to talk tonight about research that's done by some other people that I really admire, and we're going to talk about how this has impacted, these influences maybe came together in a way that opened up your predispositions for addiction if you happen to have those. So bear with me, keep your mind open, and we're going to talk about these. So let's say that you have some genetics that lean you toward being predisposed or, set up for addiction to be present in your life, all right? Now, we've talked about Dr. Mattei, who is also, like Vera Tarman, a French-Canadian, I believe he's French-Canadian, he is Canadian, psychiatrist. So he's also a medical doctor, but he's worked extensively in the area of addiction, primarily with drug addicts, intravenous drug addicts, alcoholics, in very, very poor areas in Canada. And he's been exposed to all kinds of things. And he shares a lot of that information on YouTube. So I would encourage you to listen to some of his YouTube videos because they're very informational. And that can follow up with the things that I touch upon tonight. So, all right, let's say we start with a person who's got the genetics. But Dr. Mattei and a lot of other people who understand, who have worked in addiction field for a long time, as have I, going on 30 years, he says that to understand one's emotional pain, you have to look at their lives, not the addiction. because addiction is not just physiological. There are physiological components. We've talked about that for weeks and weeks and weeks, how if you're using your substance that is your addiction, then your brain is cloudy. It makes it much more difficult to think clearly, to make rational decisions, to have good judgment. So there's definitely a physiological component, but it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. When we talk about the need for abstinence, because you cannot make those healthy decisions when your brain is hooked into the need for more and more and more and more of that drug. Because when the brain is involved, you've got the compulsion, you've got the cravings, you've got the constant obsession. So you have to get rid of the substance. That's the reason abstinence is so necessary. And then we have to look at a person's life, because addiction is way more than just physiological. Remember, in part, addiction is a brain disease, but it's more than just a brain disease too. It's a psychological, it's a physiological, it's a spiritual, it's a financial. I mean, it's kind of everywhere. And what research is showing is that there needs to be certain conditions met in order for an addiction to manifest, to spring forward, to show up in your life, for you to act out on the predetermination, or the being predisposed, not the predetermination, but having more susceptibility to it. You have to have a person who is susceptible, meaning they've got to have the genetics and some of this environmental stress. So a susceptible person and stress. Let's talk about exactly what that means, okay? So again, Dr. Mattei, Dr. John Friel, John Bradshaw, a lot of these people who I respect and admire and have read a great deal about will tell you that the people who are most prone to addictions are the people who had the most difficult time early in life. This isn't just me saying that. It's a lot of other people. And in my experience, in my 30 years working in this field, and my personal experience with addiction, I know that that's true. So let's talk about what that's about. Well, and why are they talking about it being in the earliest years, okay? It's because people who are young, if you understand very much about child development, most people don't really, from a scientific perspective, it's important that you look at this, because this is really, really, really important. Science has shown that your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making parts of your brain, the areas of your brain that, help you really be able to look at your life objectively from an outsider's perspective, are not fully developed until your early to mid-20s. So think about how far you are at the age of 5 to 8 from the age of 25. In other words, children's brains cannot and do not process things, make sense of things, sort through a bunch of information, and come to logical, rational conclusions like adult brains have the ability to do. So we got little people who are living in stressful environments, who endure pain from whatever source, which we will get to in a minute, and therefore, because they don't have the literal ability to make healthy, rational decisions, and if they don't have people outside of them helping them to do that, then they have a lot of pain, and they have to find a way to escape that pain. It doesn't mean you're drinking excessively at the age of 6, or you're, going to the store and buying yourself all kinds of junk food at the age of 8. That's not happening. But this stress and this need to find a way to deal with it can start at those early ages. And we do find some pretty creative ways early on in life. We'll talk about that the most. But what happens in situations where children, young people, are in stressful situations? they kind of disconnect from themselves emotionally because they learn that they can't trust what's going on. Maybe people are telling them everything's fine, you're fine, everything's well, but you can know and you sense and you feel that this is a stressful environment. Maybe there's a sick family member. Maybe there's parents who are fighting a lot, or you're in the middle of a divorce in a family, or you're in the middle of a custody battle and you feel all that tension. And so you find ways to disconnect yourself from those feelings, right? Isn't that what we do as adults with our addictions? We're trying to find a way to disconnect from our pain, from our intense emotions. And so children do that in ways that they emotionally disconnect from themselves. So that's a setup for addiction later on, right? Research very clearly, and this is by Patrick Carnes, who is probably the nation's leading researcher on sex addiction and what goes on in the early lives of people who grow up to manifest sex addictions, but not just sex addiction. He researches all sorts of addictions. He too says addicts are people who are most likely to have experienced trauma and abuse as children. As children. Let's talk about what this trauma and abuse can look like. We're going to spend 2 weeks on this topic, okay? Addiction, why me? Food addict, why me? Why did I find ways to disconnect myself from my emotions? Why do I have reluctance to let go of sugar or carbs or rice or pasta or ice cream? What is it? What are those feelings? What are those emotions? What are those things that I'm afraid to face, right? Well, it could be that you experienced any kind of trauma, any kind of neglect, some kind of abuse, some kind of loss that hasn't been fully addressed or resolved in your life. Children who are neglected, okay, here's what they do. Remember that child development thing. Children who suffer from stressful environments wherein they are neglected in some way, or they're abused in some way, or they're abandoned in some way, conclude, I'm not worthwhile. I don't have enough value. I'm not good enough. I'm simply not enough. Remember, we talk about shame and how at the heart of most people who struggle with addictions, there is this shame. And shame is the voice that says, I'm not okay. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. So we have to heal the shame, heal the relationship with self, heal ourselves from woundedness. Let's talk about what the heck am I talking about, this woundedness. I wasn't abused. I wasn't neglected. I wasn't, whatever. My life wasn't stressful. Well, let me remind you that 60%, 60% of people who grow up to be obese have been sexually abused as children. I'm going to let that one sink in for a minute. Yes, I said 60% of people who become obese have been sexually abused. That may seem really high to you, but I'm going to suggest that the actual number is even higher. So what's the deal with food and the connection with childhood sexual abuse? Well, a lot of people use weight to distance themselves from other people. They want to be left alone. A lot of people regain weight when they lose weight if they've been sexually abused because they start getting attention that's unwanted, that may be sexual in their direction, and they don't want to have anything to do with that. So just to know that that's a true statement, and that's something I hear literally every single day, not just women, men and women. And that is something that many, many, many people say It happened a long time ago. It doesn't affect me. Well, I believe you believe that. And that is a protection. It's a protection to say it doesn't bother me. Because if I can say it was a long time ago and it doesn't bother me, I can keep it away from me. Because I don't want it anywhere near me. Because it's painful. It brings out shame because children who are sexually abused somehow think it's their fault, or they should have done something, or there could have been something. No, they couldn't. Adults who live as victims, it's not a good thing, but children are victims. Children are victims. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to go? They're going to go get their own apartment? They're going to go get a job? No, children are victims of the people they're with, of the surroundings they're in, and oftentimes there's absolutely nothing they can do. So if you have been sexually abused, whether or not weight has been an issue for you, please get some help to talk to somebody about it. The idea of getting help for sexual abuse is not to re-traumatize you. That's not the goal. It's not to put you back in that scenario. Remember, you never have to live there again. All you have to do is tell somebody about it. Get the feelings out. Let yourself be angry and sad and hurt about it so that you're free to move on from it. Remember, these things subconsciously follow us around and chomp at our behind until we stop, pay attention to them, address them by talking about it, and then they don't have to try to get our attention. Other forms of abuse or neglect run the gamut from, you know what, you had a parent who had to work 2 or 3 jobs to keep food on your table and clothes on your back so you could have a good education. Those are necessary things in those circumstances. Nobody has intentionally done anything to harm you or neglect you or abuse you. But in a situation where somebody literally has the need to take care of your physical needs, you're still neglected because they're not there for you very much. They love you. They're doing their best for you. We're not angry at them. We're not going to say they were bad people. We're just going to acknowledge that when there's nobody there to take care of you, there's a little bit of neglect, not by anybody's fault or intention. All right. So there's a lot of neglect that occurs for circumstances out of people's control, not because there's intentional abuse. All the way to the other end of the continuum where there is sexual abuse or there is physical abuse and people are, taking their anger out on children or, and listen, we're going to learn to have compassion for those people too, even though we absolutely detest what they're doing. We know one thing for darn sure. They're very sick and very wounded. That doesn't mean we approve of what they do or what they did. But we can understand the level of sickness going on there. So anywhere on that continuum are various degrees of abuse and neglect that result in a child feeling stressed. And a child that doesn't know how to deal with that stress. And a child who cannot have the coping skills or the adult rationalizing skills to find healthy ways to cope with those things. We have a child who finds some kind of way to survive those stressful environments. Those factors, along with a whole lot of other things, but to include a predisposition genetically for addiction, are those people who are the ones most likely to grow up and develop an addiction, because the purpose of addiction a lot of times is to keep us emotionally distanced from our thoughts, from the feelings we don't want to deal with. So part of the healing process is learning to deal with those feelings. It's probably not something you're going to want to do by yourself because it can get pretty intimidating, pretty overwhelming, pretty, you want to go use when you get into the middle of those things. I'm not even suggesting you spend a whole lot of time today or tomorrow or next week going there. But I just want you to take a look at your life, talk to people you really trust, and start thinking about, gosh, was there any neglect or abuse in my family? Talk to your siblings. See what they think. A lot of times, there'll be 4 or 5 people in the family are going, yeah, there was some crap going on in our house, and one that's going, no, there wasn't. No, there wasn't. Everything was great in my house. I don't know what house you lived in. How could we have grown up in the same house and had such different experiences? Well, sometimes age gaps between siblings does result in a very different experience, or your parents have different relationships with each children. There's a lot of stuff here to wade through and sort through. But my point tonight is to say that once a person is able to be abstinent from their addictive substance, they are then freed up to deal with some of this other stuff. If a person doesn't deal with this other stuff and they have this other stuff in the emotional closet, that's what we call a dry drunk, because they've quit using the alcohol or the drugs, or they've learned to eat healthy, but they still carry all of this emotional baggage with them, and they want to keep it locked away, except that it keeps spewing out of them in the form of anger or rage or childish behavior or stinking thinking or, all kinds of unhealthy adult behaviors. That's a dry drunk. That's a person who hasn't dealt with the issues. They're just clean. All right? They're just abstinent. So healing from addiction, friends, is a whole lot more than just abstinence. But abstinence has to come first. It has to come first because you got to get rid of the compulsion and the craving and the you got to clear your brain and make room for dealing with these other things. So you thought we had gotten started on some of this stuff before? We are just getting started with what does healing from addiction really look like and why me. So you probably are an addict if you had a genetic predisposition, if there was some stress in your early childhood in particular, if there was, very little attention given to children and their needs in terms of how are you feeling, what do you need, are you having trouble, how can I help you work through that. Most parents were ill-equipped because their parents didn't do those things with them and their parents didn't do those things with them. So some generation has to go, okay, how do I become a healthy adult so that I can be a healthy parent or a healthy grandparent and help a new generation develop healthy skills? Because even if you have the predisposition genetically for addiction, but you have people helping you deal with life in effective ways, learn to deal with your feelings, help you learn some healthy coping skills, help you learn healthy communication skills, those genetics may not get flipped on. So even if you have the predisposition, you may not end up acting out in addictive manners. So take hope, right? If you've got kids or grandkids who probably have a genetic predisposition for addiction or obesity, it doesn't have to flourish and become that, because you can teach them how to eat healthy. You can teach them to exercise on a regular basis. That will help with the predisposition for obesity. They may be larger than other kids, but they may, just because of the genetics, but they may not become obese to the point that their health is endangered, right? Same with addiction. So you might be predisposed genetically, but if you don't have an environment in which you need to find some way to cope when you're a young person, then it may not flourish. So there's a lot of hope here. And you, if you're an addict, have all kinds of hope because you're an adult and you have the choice to get healthier and get happier. So, got to close here for tonight. This video will be on my YouTube page. It will be on my web page. It will be on my Facebook page. And all of the Food Addiction Fair and Firm classes, discussions, whatever we're going to call these, will be made into a podcast that will soon appear. And it too will be called Food Addiction Fair and Firm. And so you'll be able to listen to the podcast on your iPhones or on your smartphones or in your car when you're driving. So that's another good thing to look forward to. And I'm still working on a place to have our meetings. So I'm not going to give up on that until we're doing that. All right, guys. Thank you again for joining me. Remember, I'm your recovery conscience. Hear me talking to you. Go back and listen to me talking to you. And remember, there's tons of hope. I am a grateful recovering alcoholic. I know so much more joy in my life today because I'm an addict and because I chose to get the help, to find the support, to use the 4 ACEs that I've been sharing with you, and learn to heal from addiction and find recovery. So, your health, it's your responsibility this day and every day. I will see you next time. Make it a great one. Take care.